Hello, Jacob.
Welcome to SENSESPACE, continued from before the recording.
Yes, cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. See where this goes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you're now the third person from the Rebel Wisdom wider network to come on. I had
Right.
Charlie and Ali on as well. So I was just kind of thinking about how much of a sort of personal inflection point that retreat we were on together was for me. And you were kind of my group's facilitator. So that's how we met. You do a lot of other interesting stuff as well. So, yeah.
I like to think so, more and more, which is good. You know, it's quite rich at the moment in my life, it feels like. The questions that I get the privilege to work with, the people I've been meeting also in the last years since moving to London from Berlin, like that's 2 years ago, where I used to live for about 6 years. So yeah, it's been good going here. So it's interesting times as well. So
Is it a different kind of quality flavor of like the scene of people that you're able to sort of tap into in London?
yeah, for sure. In Berlin, it was much more that it was online. I was already part of these networks, and some people that I knew are a bit more warm already. But throughout history, where I first used to hang out, like through the Zen community, integral community, you could say, like also part of that in the US, and seeing that kind of evolve and the people growing up and develop, and and some having their own iterations of themselves, and a lot of them like kind of had entered this space that you and I are kind of both keeping an eye on. This still weird corner of the internet, I guess, but it's gaining momentum. And I think that when I moved to London, here, and especially through Rebel Wisdom, who I kind of entered through, by befriending Ali and David, and having these conversations. That's where I really, started getting to know more and more people that are also active here. So there's been quite interesting. As they say, we're still in the process of like finding the others, and to some extent that is true. But there's also been various phases to that, and I think when I entered through Rebel Wisdom, we were still pretty much in the beginning phases of that. Like, oh, there's a podcast there popping up, and that person writes this in Medium, and that's and now I feel we're kind of moving into a different place, but I don't know how you see that. So
yeah, I get this like visual image of a kind of like a gathering together, and then like a sort of ascending momentum, sort of in the individuals. I mean, it's kind of like it's a mixture of like personal development combined with concern for like understanding the world at many levels, and kind of transcending the current polarities, being able to talk about all domains of understanding and controversy at a level which meaningfully speaks to everyone, plus trying to answer the very sort of central question of like the death of religion in the Western world, and how to tap into sort of deeper intuitive capacities and source energy within ourselves in the context of community. So I'm actually not very fond of like sometimes when we talk about the men's work and the men's masculinity, like rethinking masculinity stuff, it can get a little bit like down an alley road.
sure, yeah,
I guess, and it just becomes about that. But I feel like that is like a good starting point, especially because your second name is Mensch. What is the kind of, I was thinking recently, like, what's the road? Like in our culture, it's just like you become 18 and now you're a man. you know, and there's not really a sense of, well, you've reached the age of a man, but you haven't arrived at manhood, and
Sure.
what might be the ways and the kind of the development and that kind of thing that kind of makes up your understanding of what that is.
Yeah, you're talking of coming of age, I guess. Well, I don't know if I can answer it for myself. I mean, I come from a culture where that message of what a man is, you know, Holland, I grew up in Holland, and what that is was quite implicit. You know, it wasn't so much in my case said like this is what a man is, this is what he does. It wasn't like that at all. So I never felt that pressure so much, and also not, of course, legally. It was 18, okay, I'm a man, but I think biologically I felt I was growing up. But was I then actually, you know, mature? I've kind of always held that question, and I'm actually still holding it, you know. So I think and coming back to your question, like what is then a man? That just also keeps changing. So it's definitely a process that is not finished. I can tell you that. You know, when I hear your question, I think the path for me and maybe for everybody is just like is fucking up. You know, it's just one mistake after another, and learning from that. You know, we got to really learn to navigate the testosterone interface with the world. You know, that is like one thing that has various iterations, and also like, you know, depending on the love question, the relationship question, coming into your body, which is not easy. At least for me, it wasn't. When I say, it was quite a journey. I think the first thing, you know, about having to be a man is dealing with having the body of a man. And that's what I meant also by having testosterone, but also in my case, where I grew up, I developed some developmental trauma around my emotions, the ability to connect, trying to compensate through love seeking, you know, like just going after what was salient sometimes in more lusty ways than I knew I was actually, you know, looking for something. Trying to find something essential. So trying to fill all your holes. And I think, growing up is like that. You know, you kind of start to understand what you're compensating for and what you're seeking on the outside. And having engaged in spiritual work, it's mainly working through that stuff. And in my case, you know, they sometimes say what you don't understand, you have to live. And so you either see it, you know, sitting on a meditation cushion maybe, and then you can start to practice it. But if you don't see it in action, you know, when you're so identified with all these lacks, then you have to live it, and then you have to kind of follow the path of mistakes, and learning the hard way is my experience. So it's been that. But again, in my case, that question of what is a man or who am I as a man has never been very pressing. It's not through that lens, you know, more like, just a human being, of course, experienced as and life as a human being experienced through the body of a man. So I would say it more like that.
I'm there's a lot of things opening up there, and I'm feeling like an invitation to.
Sorry, I'm all over the place.
No. An invitation to reformulate the question itself is what was the main thrust of what I'm getting from you, is like, rather than, I mean, the question, what is a man, is actually a very kind of closed and short, and like the very nature of the question is imbued with some of the issues, right?
Sure, yeah.
Whereas we might ask, we could move that from what is to what is the potential of, right? And then probably we could we could develop an even more sort of intuitive and mysterious kind of way of formulating it. But
true, and I think a good start is changing the question, right? Like, what is a man? And then adding to you, what is a man to you, right? Then it becomes personal. Then it already is like, oh wait, instead of making it an answer that is true for a collective, and that is always problematic, right? Where they become norms, etc. Versus having a question as an individual and having to figure it out, because then truth immediately becomes dynamic. And if you want, earnestly hold that question, then it's very much along the line of what I just said. And as Rilke also said, you have to hold the questions and live into the answer. And I think that is very true. And you can never arrive at the truth of what a man is then, and even like, I think, what is a human being? So it always works both ways. And, and in my experience is the interesting thing, if you really live it and go through these, work with it through the mind and deconstruct through that, like what it is not, right? What is it not? You deconstruct it and you wind up with like, not answers, at least not like one that you can put on the wall, but a lived experience of the emptiness of those concepts, right? So that's how I feel it. So, and coming back to the question, right now, I'm becoming more and more, funnily enough, being invited to events, where I'm asked to be as a masculine presence for some reason. And because we want to work with polarity, and people that I hang out with, they want to work with the polarity and being able to have this agency and sovereignty in relationship, right? Which is very important. And then it is seen through the lens of masculine and feminine polarities. But even though I've become more fluid, sometime when I started reading David Data, when I was like in my early 30s or something like that, then it was very much this idea of, here's a man and I can do that. But now I just feel, when there's a masculine essence, and although there's definitely a truth to that, but more and more, and I know I have a masculine essence, but it's actually been quite replaced by the fluidity between the masculine and the feminine. So the net result is that I feel quite neutral, to be honest, and so it's quite funny coming back to the question of like, what is a man? Like, oh yeah, it's like I have to remember myself.
There's a kind of
way. Yeah.
It feels like there's a way in which like both men and women can kind of start out from a position of having a limited notion of who they are, and having that imbued with all of the cultural components, expectations and pressure, and incentives and so forth, and just physical embodied realities and how that shows up. The experience of being a 17-year-old girl and a 17-year-old boy is going to be palpably different, especially, and it's going to change at different stages. But developmentally, maybe, perhaps a woman who's got a real relationship to the feminine and to the intuitive and is very good at understanding other people's emotions, but perhaps she's got more of a disconnected relationship to the masculine, something to do with her father, and so the feminine element may be more chaotic. And so for her, it's more of an integrating of that kind of part that is disconnected, however it is, just from cultural experience or from family or whatever, integrating that. And then she's kind of coming up with her integrated masculine and feminine ongoing, and you're coming up as well. And then you're meeting each other at a place where it's like, it's not like, there's a kind of sense where some of the directionality of social justice right now is getting away from getting away from gender in a way that like kind of completely does away with the sort of embodied reality. And what I'm getting from you is more like we kind of both integrate all that, the parts, and kind of transcend ourselves, meet one another. And then there's still going to be this like, you know, I'm a man, you're a woman, and but it's going to be more like playfully present, and you're going to be more present to it. And, you know, sort of higher levels of communication than most people who get married at a young age don't, you know, they kind of just get a package of skills from their parents.
Sure. Yeah.
Move it on a little bit down the line, and then that just becomes how they're going to live with their partner for the next several decades. There's a lot, but
Could be that. Yeah. Is there a question in there?
I guess, yeah. And the one other part that was really felt salient is like, yeah, the relationships to women, that's pretty important. And because that's kind of tied up with your relationship to love, relationship to your sexuality, which is key to your embodiment, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. A friend of mine once said, like a Buddhist friend of mine, he said, yeah, relationships are the highest yoga. I don't know where he did it get from, where he got it from, but yeah, there's certainly a truth in that, right? I mean, I think when it comes to relationships, and at least it was in my case, you don't always get what you want, but you definitely get what you need. And that what that need is very much dependent on like, yeah, what your destiny in life is as well, I guess, you know, and how interested you are in development and openness. And I mean, for me, it was a real tug of war between trying to get what I wanted versus what I needed. You know, the drama is in between. So I always learned, well, at least, you know, I forget the name of this book. It was Coming Apart Together. I forget the author. I read it years ago, but she basically said relationship is a real, it's always a learning, you know, to the soul. It always has to, there's always implicitly something in there that you have to learn. And for me, that was very much true, but I didn't understand what I was learning while I was in the relationship. You know, what I've shared before is what you don't understand, you have to live. So there was a lot of living through relationship, and each one I had to, you know, in retrospect, I saw it like, oh yeah, that was what I was learning. That was what I was learning, you know, like, for example, how the conditionality of my own love and my giving. I had a relationship which was very difficult, and I had to constantly, actually, this is a good example of masculine and feminine dance, at which I wasn't skilled, but, you know, she was needy. She was struggling with mental health, and I and I constantly had to shift between like a mothering energy in my essence, let's say, which is more masculine, and be mothering and giving, you know, and because she would oscillate in her moods and her needs so fast that I became confused between the two, you know, like the poles, where am I hanging out? And I sacrificed a lot in that relationship, you know, and I didn't get it back. And then when she eventually broke up with me, you know, which was then, I was really felt with a feeling, left with a feeling of like, oh my God, I did all these things for you, and now you just leave me like that, you know, and for another guy too. It was like really, really quickly. And so, you know, and that's when I really sat with the pain, and I saw, oh my God, yeah, this is just about the conditionality of my own love. And this is something that I used to judge my own mother for, like really, really, you know, badly. That you know, which was kind of damaging in that way. But I had internalized that aspect of her, see, and that was just being worked through. And there's just one example of like what I had to learn. In other relationships, it was I had to learn to fight, right? Like I had one girlfriend who was great. Again, you know, seriously, I'm really grateful. I don't see these relationships as failed at all, like nothing of the sort, you know. It's like a few ones that are questionable, but, you know, but no, the meaningful ones were yeah, great learning experiences, of course. So yeah, like I said, in some I had to fight, in some I had to see, you know, that my love was conditional, In others, I just had to open to love, where everything was right, which is also like sometimes very, very difficult, although we think that's what we want, right? But when you actually get it and it conflicts with your self-image of being worthy of love, then you're in again for trouble, because yeah, receiving love is not part of the ego structure. That is more in a seeking mode, right? So that's a way of expression, right? Seeking for love and trying to get your ego gratification and bodily lustiness.
There's so many,
Right, Matt?
no, go on.
Oh, no, it's fine. I'm curious how that landed with you.
There's a lot there. Just initially kind of feeling like, wow, this is actually quite important. What you're doing rather than what you're saying is like something that we culturally have a huge difficulty doing. Just like talking about the process of all the shit that you go through in order to figure out that there was something wrong that needed to be addressed. And that very often is in the context of your relationship with the other sex. And like who at the BBC, who at Channel 4 is, publicly speaking about the intimacies of their lives in a sort of contemplative way. And, people are still going to fuck up and have to fuck up. But perhaps, if I had heard this from you a couple of years ago, I might have sort of wised up to patterns that I was stuck in and stuff like more quickly. So I welcome more discussion of it, and it's like bringing out more of the, like so much of the sort of nebulous, violent, mimetic cloud that this podcast is like slowly streaming into is just, it's like battling over information. And one of the ways that we can get away from that is bringing the personal element, but that requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires knowing yourself and experiencing what those things are to the depth that you can then speak about them and not just be completely overwhelmed because you yourself have never had the chance to address them. Yeah, it's very, very astute, and it's super resonant with my own experience as well. It's like and I think it's something that's been afforded to sort of our generation more than any other generation before. Is what I was talking to one of my female friends, and she was telling me, like, sort of our parents' generation and prior, the expectation of marriage came so quick.
Right.
You're 18, maybe 21 as a man.
For sure.
You didn't have this like.
That was very different.
This weird sort of liminal developmental period between finishing university and settling in a long-term relationship. So we can go through like 3 or 4 meaningful relationships in our 20s, and in the course of that, like each new person is like a dynamic relational sort of energy which like reveals and brings out different parts of yourself. And so therein lies the source of the development, really, because they could actualize and call out the good things, and they could also very likely have traumas corresponding to your traumas.
Sure.
And I've there's a whole sort of metaphysical like trans-temporal understanding of reality, which comes when you like tunnel down into the nature of that phenomenon. But just to be able to talk about the reality of it is super important.
Yeah, and especially the point you brought up, in some ways, our traumas are always related, right? Like in the relationships. And there's just another kind of truth, I think, at least it comes close. And true for me is like, if you can be narcissistically wounded, you know, you are going to be. So as long as this narcissistic wounding is there, you haven't healed it, it's going to be touched by the world. You know, unless you're so avoidant and thick, or you're very rich, so you can afford yourself a lifestyle of avoidance. You know, that is then helpful. But I think it's difficult to hide in a relationship. You know, unless you're both numb. But if it's real, then yeah, then that happens. What you just said. And what I also picked up on what you said a few minutes ago is you said, well, if I heard what you just said like a few years earlier, I might have caught on. And you know, and especially that word might, because we're always where we are, so we can't hear like the messages from the future, right? Like unless you're very perceptive. And even when you're perceptive and you're kind of on the lookout for wisdom, right? But even then you can't hear it. I mean, and what's even worse, when you're already learned, you've read many books on personal development, so you know things already intellectually, but you haven't reached the maturity to have to deal with that kind of particular issue. And then you encounter and yeah, I got this, you know, and you kind of gloss over it because like the mind, actually your smarts make it so that it slips unnoticed and it goes much more easy to shadow. So here learning about things and development and stages and shit that can come up and that other people warn you for can be quite counterproductive, I find. So, I mean, especially in spiritual practice, you know, which I've kind of been on a path for over 2 decades, like it's especially the spiritual truths that tend to get in the way when you understand them intellectually, but when you're, you know, stumbling onto it, especially the warnings around ego, then it, you know, it's always like, oh yeah, I got this. I know it. And you read about it, but it's the map is not the territory, as they say. And, and that's very true. So
Yeah.
be careful with the maps, right?
There's a sort of, there's an interesting sort of dialectic of progress or something like that, wherein like, you know, you learn, you know, you release a trauma or you learn a new wisdom and you've developed a wider perception of the world and more intimacy with the world and the people in it, more relationship to truth. But then with each new one, it's like sort of the breadth and depth of world that you're exposed to and wrestling with is more. So it's never reaching the point of like, oh, it's all like chill. But
sometimes you have a period sometimes where you're like, oh yeah, you get to hang back a little bit. But
there is a progress. There's a, you know, there's more of a richness, more of a sense of like unknown but meaningful directionality.
Yeah. Right.
And so this is kind of convergent with the idea of emergence in some way. And I want to talk about what it is you're doing sort of with your organizational stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Read it in, and then it's going to sort of bend back in some interesting way and come together.
Right. Yeah.
And tell me, so you're working for Emerge, is that right?
I work for Emerge. Let me back up. I'm employed by Perspectiva, which is a research institute based in London. And we're basically about, the short version is, our tagline is System Soul Society. So we are looking basically at the systems, how they relate to our inner worlds, how we enact all this back into society, you know. So we look at how these things relate. And Perspectiva is a, you know, we have a few names for the project. One is an urgent 100-year project that says something about the time scales that we're thinking on. Another is a rogue bunch of intellectuals. You know, many of the people in the Perspectiva field are not traditional academics. You know, it is a research institute and there's obviously very bright people, but but not traditional academics. So, and I can talk about Perspectiva more in detail later, but to get to Emerge, first is to Perspectiva. There's also a like, let's say, a social element as part of our theories of change, and that is the Emerge project. So, which is partly a network. It's a media platform which is headquartered in Berlin. So there's a website you can go to. It's www.whatisemerging.com. And that actually is more about, built upon the premise of emergence and the state of the world that we find ourselves in, with this current level of complexity where you just can't do to use a sense-making framework. Like it's no longer a complex space, but it's no longer a complicated space, but a complex space, and therefore you need other methods. So you can't just like envision the world, which is somewhere there in the future. How do we get there? Strategy, plan, execute. That doesn't work, right? Like that is nowadays you just got to find different ways of working and different practices that work in complexity and emergence. It's still, to me at least, a hope, that it actually works in terms of building a new we that we envision Emerge to be, with a global span. But so yeah, it's we can go in more detail about that, like some of the thinking that is there and the people behind it, and what you find interesting. But yeah, I should say Perspectiva was co-founded by Jonathan Rosen, who heads it operationally. He's a former 3-time British chess grandmaster champion. So. And Thomas Björkman is mainly an entrepreneur who's active in many change initiatives. So, and also, one of the founders for Emerge. So these are the people. Maybe that's a good enough overview. We can go both ways, like to Perspectiva or Emerge, or whatever you want to talk about.
One of the great things about Emergence. One of the characteristics of emergence for me, I'm appreciating maybe there's someone listening who still doesn't know what I'm talking about, is this phenomena of like, you're kind of searching for a thing and you don't know what it is, and then it just manifests in reality right at the right time.
Yeah.
And
Daniel Schmachtenberger called it like the closest thing to magic that's actually a scientific term.
Yeah, it's probably associated with logos in some way as well, but it's just like, I mean, personally for me, I think it's very like awesome and pertinent, and we're definitely going to have to sort of talk more about the vision for it, because I kind of, talk about kind of roguish academics and so forth. I think it's less about, sometimes we can stray into like, oh, we're rebels, like Eric Weinstein, I think, gets a little carried away with being a rebel. Sure. And it's less about like our identity is constituted of being rebels against something. And it's more just that there are constraints within the cultures of the broad civic, political, and social institutions which prevent certain kinds of thinkers, non-heterodox, non-orthodox people. So,
sure.
I very much was like, I came from a path of like respect for the institutions and a desire to make myself into the kind of person that would fit them to a degree. But I found that so sort of difficult, ongoing. And I had a real sort of passion for this line of inquiry. I was researching about sort of Islam and jihadism and the whole complex relationship of things occurring there. And, it's, for the most part, the people in the academy and the think tanks weren't really being afforded the intellectual room and going outside of the known enough.
True.
to do this kind of modeling. And part of that is the cultural constraints, let's say, because
for sure. Yeah, no, I can speak to that. I mean, because like at Perspectiva, we very much want to be an answer to that partly, or we are it, you know, because all these siloed worlds, even within academia, of course, often really don't talk to each other. When we see that that the world runs smoothly, you know, that's a time for experts. You know, go deep and narrow on a very tiny piece of the chain of cause and effect, and there you can become a specialist. But zooming out, and try to see the holes. That is relatively new in some ways. You know, if you look at the advent of system science, and which is just a couple of decades, really. So when it breaks down, and that relates to the complex space that we're now operating in, and sometimes liminal, it feels like, when you don't even know in what space you're operating in, make it very necessary that we become dot connectors, I think, you know, and that we're expert generalists and not just experts, because experts are good for when it's, like I said, run smooth. You know, Jonathan like explained this to me, and I think that is very true, and that's what Perspectiva is partly founded upon, because, you know, the people there is some of them who are familiar in the space, to your listeners and viewers, like Bonita Roy or Zach Stein. They are publishing books and will be coming out at some point. There's Anthea Lawson, who is lesser known, but she's an activist. What else is there? There's Indra Adnan, who also publishes on Emerge, who's been rethinking politics, who does the Alternative UK. You know, very, very interesting project. Like, I encourage people to check that out. So it's these many, many worlds, and this goes for many, many disciplines, because, you know, all the questions that we hold, these big ones, you know, related to what you and I understand as the meta crisis. That meta also implies that the questions and the answers, like, are going to need collective intelligence and a lot of cognitive diversity, and so yeah, that is what we try to, in some way, encapsulate within Perspectiva, and how we navigate and how we think, you know, over longer term timeframes, and yeah, the types of coherent but pluralistic approaches that we need, you know, and also in theories of change, and the epistemic lineages that we find in the in our space, you know, from systems builders to interbeing people who just want to hug and sit around the campfire and say we need better relationships, and there's the rationalist community that says, oh no, but better models, better ways of, you know, less bias, and being less wrong. That's all important. Some developmentalists will, for example, say we need to just get to a higher level of consciousness and then magically our systems will change, you know. But others say, no, we need to build institutions and fortify the networks, blah, blah, blah. So you need all these lenses on which to view the problems that we have with, you know. You got to put each of them on. So you also need a metasystemic view of things, and see which is of course appropriate in what situation, but also get people to talk, right? And here's again, like, this is the social aspect for Emerge, and why we think it's important to bring in these worlds in some capacity or another, is because just they need to talk to each other. And not just talk to each other, they need to do it at a certain level, right? A level of discourse that is actually, or sometimes called teal, without too much distortions from our shadows, our developmental traumas, like the stuff that's being passed on through the generations, the intergenerational traumas that we have, you know, anything that distorts the field. So another part of Emerge is really explicitly working with this field and trying to clear that up through practices. You know, in Rebel Wisdom, we're big on shadow work, for example, developing sovereignty, and you could take a course for that with them. So those kinds of distortions don't happen too much. And what you then want to do, of course, is like, okay, so that's great. Now you can be together, with your expertise and your particular lens and skills and personal history. But what does it then enable, right? Can you actually listen to the future together through that clear field, like to the what of what is emerging? Because so that is important. So it's the relationships and it is the what do you do with it? Like, and that brings you to the next thing. I mean, the insights that you can generate through these clear fields. There's many methods that one can use, of course, to do that, like collective intelligence labs or Theory U, or just a few of these things that you can use, these technologies. But then it's also about action. So Emerge will also be about acting in the world, exercising our power, after also having come up with a new theory of power that we sometimes call exousiance within Perspectiva. It's a term coined by... Sorry?
Definitely want to talk about that.
Yeah, because, power looks very differently, as Jonathan always points out. It's not the same. Being a boss in this day and age, and again, in a complex space, is not the same as it was. So we got to look at, like, what does it mean, power? It comes with so much baggage for people, like, especially in activist circles. Like, oh, what is your personal relationship to power, and how do we exercise it? What is it? What is my own hatred around people in power, or how do I suppress it, etc. But I don't want to get stuck on that. It's just an example of what we want to work with. Yeah.
And,
Maybe there's a good time to pause here, because I know I'm rambling on. Very excited about this stuff. See.
Yeah, I mean, it is relevant, because one of the qualities of this kind of meta approach is that what you draw out in the individual instantiation, you're looking at social care or something, in some way kind of maps the way of going about it that kind of stacks up to your meta understanding of what's going on, stacks down to your personal relationship with the world as well. So, like, there was that author, Minna Salami.
Yeah.
Right. She's super interesting. Just ordered her book. She wrote a number of articles for you guys.
Great. Yeah, she's awesome.
And what she has done is, like, seeded a completely radically different understanding of power, drawing on sort of spirituality and relationship and understanding of nature and other things. And she seeded that within a culture of feminism, which is characterized largely by a different understanding of power. It's much more from a place of disempowerment and grasping for material power. Whereas this way of emerging power is much more like, you're more kind of getting out of the way and allowing it to flow through you, whatever it is that you are sort of called to do. And then it almost becomes less, it can be strident, and it can have like a force to it, but it's not really forceful in the same way.
For sure.
I'd love to sort of unpack the liminality, the quality of the liminality, and also the quality of the meta crisis, and how that sort of plays into this. Because I know Jonathan wrote a Medium article.
Yeah. I just want to say, like, a lot of what I share here, is actually me. It's my understanding of his thinking and the way he relays it. He's really the brain behind this. And just want to acknowledge that, and also say that Emerge, everything I just shared, it's still quite at the beginning stages. There's been a process of clarification that we've just kind of come to some finalization. So all of this is the intent, but that's what I would just want to say. So and about power, where did you want to start with that? I feel to do that, we need to kind of slow down a little bit.
Right? Let's take a breath.
Yeah, no, seriously. It's because I don't think you can talk from that place if, or you can't talk about it if you don't talk from that place, right? It's what you just already started doing, this tiny somatic inquiry to get a sense for like, oh yeah, it's more receptive. I think I saw your body move, right, with your hands. So yeah, I think we're sensing that these things are also embodied intelligences, right? Words have power. Words have this influence there. It's not just throwing it out there as a new concept. It's yeah, having the sensitivity to attune, and that's what also why the word exousiance is also just so beautiful in itself, right? It's like it's a whole lot better than power. Like pow pow pow. Anyway,
They're all the supervillains of every franchise, sort of power.
yeah, I mean, just take the word and let it like hit you, power, right now. Like it's just so different. You know, I see you look up at this moment. You know, it's different. Like, and then if you go to exousiance, I mean, it's like I'm getting a massage. If I say it. But no, I don't want to ridicule it too much. But you know, I think this is important what we're tapping into, right? I feel myself drop more into the belly when I speak of that term, and as we're doing a little bit of yeah, like I don't know, what is this, Jacob? What are we doing? Is this?
Well, it's as you say, power.
Yeah.
There is a certain enticement in the word, and there's also
Sure.
there's a sort of a grasping energy as well.
Yeah.
Like both, yeah, and
You want to? Do you want me to speak to that, or you want to finish?
well, so I want to speak to exousiance in
Okay.
relationship to that, because it's
Yeah, I
very
can.
much more sort of, it's got a feminine kind of air to
Yeah.
it. The nature
Yeah.
of the word,
Yeah.
exousiance, it's more expressive.
Yeah.
And it's also got that sort of, you know, the end of the word sort of tapers off.
Right.
You know, it's like
Yeah.
exousiance.
Yeah.
Like, where is that
It's a sensuous
leading
word.
off
Maybe.
to?
Yeah. It's even erotic. Yeah. I can. You know. Let me just see if I can like phrase this, like give words to this really well. When coming from the place of like the inquiry around power, there's mainly two things when we grow up as kids that are from the outside, that we experience is coming from the outside. And one is love, and the other is power, you know, and love very crudely in the form of milk and just touch and whatnot. And you're so dependent, right? So we become very attuned to seek it on the outside, right? Before we find it in ourselves. And it pulls us out of ourselves. And when I sense power, you know, that's the second one. As children, very young, we don't have any power. You know, people pick us up all the time as babies. You can't move your limbs even. You're shooting all over the place. You shit yourself for years. You know, other people have to clean you up. Yeah, I mean, you don't have the power to do that. You can't just wipe your own ass when you're like 6 months old, right? So, and it goes on for a while. So power comes from the outside. So these two things, and it makes us seeking. It's a very active thing. And let's just maybe keep it short here. But yeah, so we become seekers for these things, but it's very much active. And when we were just getting into, you know, the somatic literacy of the somatic, literacy of exousiance, when you said like, yeah, it's receptive, it's still powerful. You know, that's another thing our minds can't combine. You know, power is pushing like will and hard and coercive and dark and over you. It's out to get you, blah, blah, blah. So we're defended against it. And when we seek it, we think that that's it. And then we can't see that it also can go hand in hand, you know, with love, for example. You can be both powerful and loving. And for a long time, we're not able to experience both, you know, or be innocent and vulnerable, and at the same time be incredibly strong, right? Like that is something we don't. Well, it takes a long time to get it. At least for me, it took a long time to get it. But so, and then coming back to exousiance, that really feels, you know, there's this receptivity. Like when I say it, it brings me more into alignment, into the vertical. It brings me into my genitals, even, right? Yeah, and it's being there more down there, you know, that supports your dignity, right? Me at least. If I'm in my vertical, if I feel aligned and coherent, then I'm in my dignity. From that place, I can also be receptive if I bring that in, if the heart's aligned. And but power, my man, I just want to, you know, here I start seeking, you know, when it goes to my eyes, become predatorial view, like it's this outside programming that we were, you know, trained to look out for and see it, and our nervous systems are trained. And but the great thing about it is, of course, it can be remedied. We can deconstruct the ego structures that we build around either not having power, thinking that we need power, all the defenses around it. That can be worked through. And yeah, now I'm going there. I don't know if you want to go there, like what it's actually in practice, or why I think it's so important to think about this and find ways to work with the notion of power in practice, to really have a community of practitioners, you know, where this is an explicit thing. And but then looking at it through our own conditioning. And of course, there's a lot of talk about power, and they have it, you know, in the social justice world, and a fringe, you know, minority who weaponize this language and try to thwart the understanding of what it is. And but in doing so, like using their understanding of what it is in a very nefarious way, is to cause like true polarization, of course. So here again, I think that's why coming back to Anthea Lawson's work on the entangled activist, it's so important that we do that work, right? Anger, and see, you know, in the spiritual school that I train in, which when I'm a student in, we see anger as distorted strength. It's a distorted form of essential strength, and power also has an essential element. The distorted element of power is hatred, and it's frozen. It's the frozen power. And once you work through the structure, you actually wind up in a place where it's peace and power, essential power. And it looks very, very different. You know, it's a non-coercive type power. It's embodied, it's internalized, it's calm, especially the peace part. You know, I think in particular, this is why Islam struggles so much with hatred, you know, while saying that they are the religion of peace, you know, and the frustrating loop that through centuries of colonization, of inner strife and war and fragmentation, and you know, why this is such a potent combination in Islam. Like on the one hand, the religion of peace, and on the other hand, the blind spots around the trouble that it causes in the world. But anyway, I don't want to go there. I've yeah.
The time will come.
So yeah, sure.
When I do go there, it's going to be a 20-hour long discussion. But it's
yeah, sure.
A very key sort of understanding that I got from my inquiry into that, and my thesis on it was the relationship to power and how important it is. And so what you're saying, like, it's taking some real skillfulness to hold the amount of sort of branches that are coming off of it for me, because it's the middle of this is like a key thrust of the logos of what I'm drawn to inquire into right now.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, we can go on that road, you know, of course. Sure. And here again, I want to make it very personal. You know, when I got drawn into my inquiry into Islam, you know, which was quite through a push. You know, I was a student of journalism, and I was living in Amsterdam at the time. You know, and on one morning, in a November morning, on forget the exact year, 2001, 2002, I think. You know, I was just on the way to work. It's like police cars speeding past me, and it's like, whoa, this is big. What is this? What's going on? And I come to work, and it it turns out that Theo van Gogh had been murdered just like a kilometer away from where I was just cycling. You know, who's murdered by an Islamic jihadi youth, and and I had tried to interview Theo van Gogh, like, you know, I was in contact with him sometimes because I wanted to interview him. And one time I had him on the phone and he told me, okay, interview me now. I didn't have my questions ready. And it's like, that's because you're fucking stupid. So that was kind of the guy he was, right? But he was like very talented filmmaker. And so he got murdered. And then I was like, okay, so what is going on here? And then I went to my own inquiry on it and seeing what it actually is. And yeah, I became quite taken by that, you know. And I think, again, if you look at the power question and where I was at in my own power, I really developed a very negative opinion of the religion of Islam. You know, seeing all the trouble, it really rubbed me the wrong way. Also, you know, there's plenty of critics, of course, reading Sam Harris and looking at all these reading all these things. And it's quite a broad inquiry, I would say, you know, but mostly on the problematized side of things. So yeah, it was personal to some extent, really, because it was so close. But coming back to the power question, I think that was interesting because the emotional charge that I felt always towards Islam and jihadism and the terrorism, you know, and all the negativity that is associated with it, you know, or ascribed to it. And yeah, I was emotionally charged. So I definitely had some sort of object relation with it, like, or a piece of shadow around it. And I've noticed the more I kind of have looked at power and found my own peace and done the work on the heart, that obsession with it completely dropped away. You know, it's really just an interesting journey that it's, and you know, and I wanted to write about it, I wanted to publish on it, and I never did because I always felt like, I can't write this from like a objective place, you know, a place of truth, where I just saw Islam for a long time, like, oh, it's just an evil that just has to kind of like be thrown on the scrap heap, you know, the body of thought I want to point out here, because it's all this causing all this division, etc. But the subject no longer holds me. It's for me almost a done thing. I've kind of, again, maybe this was also a relationship where I had to learn something and went through it, and yeah, I've come out the other end of it somehow. But sorry, I see you want to say something, and it's
Joe Van Gogh, really striking to me that you knew him. You'd spoken with him before, and I read the details of that case for my studies, and you know, he was murdered in broad daylight riding his bicycle to work,
right, yeah,
with a note impaled into his chest,
right,
which promised to go after Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the
exactly,
radical feminist critic of Islam, who famously like a kind of Dutch national figure.
Yep.
And you kind of bringing that to bear in the way that you did is very important. And it's what it's bringing out for me is the way in which a lot of the understandings I came to in doing this evolving inquiry about Islam and about the West's relationship to it and how we talk about it, it brings out a lot of those important elements of playing at the level required to come into relationship with emergence and so forth. Like,
for
shadow
sure,
material is absolutely important. And I've met a lot of people who, you know, they know there's something there that needs to be inquired into, but they've had friends who've been killed in
Yeah.
fact, and they're very open about the fact that that is a kind of wound which improperly worked through is an obstacle to a sort of open understanding of what's there.
Right.
And one of what I'll try and tie it together in a way where we don't go completely off on it, but one of the understanding that I came to, in a sense, sort of I brought in a lot of sort of memetics and sort of biological stuff from Brett Weinstein and so forth. So I understood it as a kind of memetic complex, like a memetic complex of the ancient world, let's say, and the qualities of it are that it is so sort of integral and holistic, and addressing every aspect of life, and also the nature of the language is such that it intentionally is in such a way that it's very difficult to talk about the ideas without talking about the people, and so in order to maintain your humanity and your human relationship and care towards all of these people with so many different like backgrounds that fall under the banner.
Absolutely.
It's I would say it's an intentional defensive mechanism of that memetic complex that makes it so difficult to talk about. And there's a lot of other sort of adaptive characteristics, let's say, that we can observe, especially in the Western context, where we have these sort of rich apparatus of kind of media actors, self-appointed intellectuals, organizations, all of which function as a kind of frontier boundary around the Muslim community's information ecology. So if I, as an outsider who's not Muslim, say anything critical publicly, what they do is they then sort of tag like white blood cells onto me and my name, defame me, say this person is a da-da-da, and they do a very sort of coordinated campaign. The strength of this memetic ecosystem is far superior and more sophisticated than like the more intolerant parts of like woke social justice now. This is like on a different order of development.
There's more structures there. I think there's more connections in that network in some ways. So it's a bit more resilient already, I think.
It's
this woke stuff.
It's not just. It's a perfect sort of model for us to come into an understanding of our own shortcomings in the West, let's say. Like it's Islam holds up a mirror to us, and it says we have community, we have robust community. There's a relationship between the youth and the elders, which is very present and real. We have an absolutely clear metaphysics and understanding of the nature of the universe. We know what the will of God is, and we know all of the answers to all of the unknowns, because it's merely a matter of interpretation.
Humans are suckers for certainty. I mean, like, doesn't matter who you are, right? If it's one thing we suck at, then it's like hanging out and not knowing. Yeah,
and I guess what I'd stress is it's as much I'm coming to understand, like from a sort of developmental, when we conceive of power, it's not just like our relationship to institutions, it's our relationship to family, let's say. So I think there's, if we did the research, what we would find is that there is a kind of emotional quality to the understanding of authority. My relationship to my father in this cultural context and my relationship to the parental authority stacks up then to my relationship to the local imam. And then my relationship to the imam stacks up to my relationship to the text and my relationship to God. So it's, that meta goes all the way up and down the stack. And because we're such a sort of disembodied, and so we have all this like shadow of alienation from our own religious origins that most people in the media, academic, institutional framework, they can't really comprehend it. And so we get into this total situation of confusion because they can't even entertain religion meaningfully, and they don't have that embodied intuition when they're coming into relationship with people with a very different orientation.
Right. Yeah. True. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. I don't know what else to say to that. There's many ways we can go from here, of course.
Well, what feels is this something which feels sort of salient to you? Something that you've sort of been like,
that
your kind
whole
of objects of attention or contemplation.
right. Well, many things right now. I don't know which one stands out at this moment. We can just like sit and see what comes up, right?
Well, you're bringing out listening for me, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's always good. Yeah, I don't. I mean, of course, there's always like the podcast, like frame in which we do, and it's being recorded, etc. But I just wish we would be much more like okay with a little bit of silence and not knowing what I just said. I mean, not just as a collective, but as individuals. I think this is actually what I sit with. It's trying to work on birthing a movement or an organization that like has emergence at its heart, and for that you got to be comfortable with not knowing, and it's just such a talk about what you internalize, the paradigm of how to do things on doing. It's like says plan, control, do this. It's so ingrained, like immediately you find a way to go and jump to action instead of just hanging out like I don't know, the capacity to hold the question. That's a skill that I think is often underemphasized, right? It's even before what Einstein says, like if I have to solve a problem, I'm going to spend 95% time framing it or formulating it, and then 5% of the time I'm just going to work on solving it. And I think it's probably what Einstein meant, right? Like, but even before the framing, there's that space of just kind of listening to the future, and this is what we have to learn to do. I feel collectively more and more and more, because when you don't know what to do, the worst thing, well, not always, but like is just jumping into action. And again, here, connecting it back to emerge is. There's this great bio. I'm going to butcher his name. Ivo Jurian, I think his name is. Forgive me, bio, if you ever watch this. But he says, like, my ancestors tell me we're in an emergency. We must slow down, and that is true. Because the action bias is just so ingrained. Everybody wants to do something, be valuable, but really sitting and taking stock of what's going on, that's it's a bit more rare. People are learning, I see it definitely in some spaces, but yeah. I mean, how do you know, right? How do you know? How do you know that is what you should be doing? And how do we know that what should happen? I mean, sure, again, if you're an expert, but then you think, but then you're also being paid to do that. But I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say here exactly. I just have this, I think I'm developing more of a, a better relationship to this not knowing. Actually, I learned a lot from Jonathan Rowson, who's again, that comes with being a grandmaster. You just hanging out in the space, in the possibility space a lot, I think, and not every road of action is like, okay, it's just one of many, and you learn to wait. I think you learn to be patient.
I'm really getting a sense of the sort of subtlety of what it is that you're doing and embodying in the course of the conversation. There's kind of something going on at a energetic level of slowing down. It's like a deepening into unknown, and a permissioning and a sort of invitation to go even further into the not knowing, and the slowing down. And it feels physiologically better. I've recently started getting a coffee before I, as part of my pre-podcast stack. And so the caffeine going through my system is an accelerant in some way as well. But this quality of slowing down, stepping back, like how much, well, certainly most people are not afforded the opportunity to do that. It's really something that you have to step into if you want to have that deeper relationship to the unknown and not knowing in the current moment. Even if you're fairly loose with your future plans, you're not a super control freak. You don't have like your 2 and 5 and 10 year timeline. Maybe you don't even know what you're doing next year. You're just going along with things. But there can be very subtle layers of it in the way that people ask you, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Somebody calls me up and they're like, what are you doing in your life? And it's not even just the question itself. It's the space that is afforded by the way of the asking of the question.
Exactly.
So where I'm at right now, sometimes people ask the question and the question has already become a constraint on the,
of course,
on the breadth of the living and not knowing.
Well, that's the question part, and then there's also like the self-image part, or the part of you that responds to or reacts to it. So yeah, that's the dialectic. The limiting is in the dialectic, but it's absolutely also in the the space that a question affords. Right? What are you doing? But I'm wondering if then is there then also the assumption, or do you feel pressure? For example, it's like, is there a physiological response to you when you hear the question? Like, I should be doing this, for example. Often this is, of course, where our inner critics come in instantly. Oh, I should be doing something else. But what I'm really doing is this,
It depends on how the energy of the person shows up.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I can quite deftly subvert the boundaries of the proposition.
Right.
Other times, the shape of the question is itself a shot, sort of boxing in, and then you're suddenly feeling like, oh, I'm in the box, and now I have to move around like this in order to just kind of keep the conversation congenial, because you're both navigating the tightly constrained game that they've created, and being aware of that as well.
Right.
Now you're thinking like, what is going on emotionally for them that is
Yeah.
creating the conditions of this?
How would you feel if I said I don't give a damn about what you do? How would it? Yeah, that's the opposite, right? Like you complete freedom. I don't give a fuck about what you do, Jacob. How does that make you feel?
That loosen things up, actually. Yeah.
Cool.
I
Yeah.
like, well, actually, I'm a big believer that swearing is associated with greater honesty for some
Mm-hmm.
reason. If we can comport ourselves authentically and meaningfully and articulately and still not give a fuck, and well, we give a fuck about what's meaningful, but we don't give a
Yeah, yeah,
fuck
yeah.
about the way of comporting ourselves and the constraints and the expectations related to that.
Sure.
And
Of
this
course, when I say I don't give a fuck, there's more subtlety than that as well, right? I mean, I can really not give a shit because I'm a disinterested cunt, or I'm really like, like I grant you all the freedom that you want to,
yeah, this is more like a
to
sort of
self actualize.
this is the Zen not giving a fuck. And that is just to sort of whip out a piece from earlier on that I was holding of like when I was talking about the cultural constraints of think tanks. If you want to go and research what I wanted to research, you have to go to think tanks and you have to go to probably neoconservative leaning think tanks. And you wear a suit and you work in an office around Westminster and so forth. The congruence between the culture of the context in which I was able to do what I wanted to do and the culture of my way of being and my way of relating to my friends and the way that I decorate my room. The notion that some profound, like, sort of transcending understanding of this complex question that I've been holding for years has occurred for me, in the context of having smoked a joint and gone to a yoga class and then had it just like sort of emerge in that flow. This is not the kind of thing that can be meaningfully. You kind of have to be like, well, am I going to talk about how I actually live my life amongst these people? Because it's going to trigger the anxieties that come from encountering someone who's outside of the controlled frame on that. And so for me, like, in order to be in truth in those contexts, it's required to develop a kind of skillfulness, because you have to kind of be able to like sort of skillfully bring in like, oh, this is actually what I'm about. This is like the way of thinking, and these are the kinds of experiences and contexts that have allowed me to reach this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to, it's kind of like, I'd like to hear if you have anything to say on that first, but.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what you like. Is it really authenticity, the word that like we're not using? I mean, we often substitute from my truth, right? I don't know. That's like another word for me that's currently up for grabs, like authenticity, and this relationship keeps changing. I won't say I'm quite there yet myself. I mean, I still want to look good, depending on the context. Sure, yeah, for sure. But what you said about kind of like the swearing, it's really interesting. Like a lot of people that have done soul work or imaginal work, and they get to speak, they swear like a lot more. And I think I was just also like speaking from that place just now. So which I was, in a way, a bit surprised by, and then so yeah, it's an interesting notion. You know, I get lately, I get quite tired of, you know, authentic performativity. It's like performative authenticity, I should call it, where everybody sits in a circle and shares their feelings, and you know, and oh yeah, this is my truth, and there I've said it, kind of thing, you know. And it's like, yeah, the courage, oh yeah, God, courage, so courageous. And also here I get to display, you know, how much insight I have into myself, or how articulate I can voice things. I don't know. You see quite a bit of that, and and I think I'm just impatient. Maybe I'm not being generous enough here too, but I don't know. I just get so bored. What do you feel? Feel like you get into these places? Yeah, I think it's basically the state where I'm in, that I'm in. You know, I just I get bored, and sometimes I just want to vomit, even though it's authentic. But yeah, this don't know, performative authenticity. Don't know. Is that worth anything?
Yes, it's actually very. It's held very lightly, but it's actually very congruent with the flow of things thus far. Especially the way that you're sort of drawing more and more awareness to the constraints and the medium and the context, the sort of invisible context that are shaping the possibility of the discussion that occurs. In a sense, like, the reason I'm here is because I couldn't be myself anywhere else, and so I had to make my own thing and go through the whole process of developing the capacity and confidence of being like, yeah, I'm actually ready to do it now. And you kind of saw me at some like inflectional stage upon that process. And this notion of authenticity is super congruent with the understanding of power.
Yeah.
I feel like true power is coming from, oh, for fuck's sake, like I can't even say it without it being, because our true power is coming from our authenticity, you know, in the sense of like.
But what is that, right? What is this authenticity?
What is authenticity when we're plumbing it down? When we're getting away from the word authenticity and getting into the being and the way of relating to being and intending to.
Yeah, because, you know, I mean, as we know, the if you let's just agree. I think we can agree that there's not such a thing as an authentic ego. But I mean, since it's never fully. I mean, since it's like the product of our past, it's historical conditioning, you know, internalized experiences and suppressions, etc. So it's kind of like always coming from history. And therefore, in the moment, you know, if you're identified with it, you can't be authentic. So, at least not the type of authenticity I think that we are getting at here, trying to get at here. And yeah, and I think therefore, like it's what you talked about. Like it's about the connection to source, right? That you then have. And make space for, and can, like what we're doing, like through the dialogue, enter in that space. Yeah, that's possible. But you know, the performative kind that you so often, that I feel I see, you know, it's very hard to get past it, you know. I mean, I can't say I'm free of it, like even that. Especially when, as you also pointed out with the question, no, a question is a space. There's like a possibility space there that gets opened up. But it's the same thing if you go to like a circling retreat or a circling event. But like, oh yeah, now the question is, you know, again, bigger. Like it's like the container of it, with a possibility space in which you're supposed to be authentic or speak your truth. You know, that just brings on for many people like a whole new layer of oh, now I must speak my truth, right? Must speak my truth. And how am I going to do that? I'm one of these people like, oh my God, I'm terrified of public speaking, you know, when it's my turn and it goes around the group, you know, and it comes near it. And I'm like, I've already mulled over the story that I'm going to tell like 10 times over just to look good or sound authentic.
It starts really getting up the meta abstractions. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, so it's funny, like how it always comes into being, and I think what came or why this comes up now is contrasting it with more like this heart speak and like this soulful place that I think we must all tap into, and I think this is, you know, so important also for many things, but for the way we think about ourselves. And that's why I kind of ask you the question, who's the one that hears the question that limits the space? Because it's not just the question that limits the space, the possibility space for you, right? It's also you as the, you know, hearer of that question and the way you choose to engage with the question. And as you said, the energetic communication through which the question comes, and and all these different kinds of not giving a fuck, having you know, having a different kind of, yeah, also a different kind of affordance space or affordance charge with it, like, so maybe it's getting too heady.
This is really, no, it's super, what it is it's illuminating all of the sort of hidden aspects of what it is, what the fuck it is that's going on here as this thing that I've called SENSESPACE, which exists. My ambition is for it to exist as in close relationship with my own developmental inquiry as possible, and to mutually afford it. And so I'm bringing to bear all of those intuitive capacities when it comes. I'm like being very careful about who it is that I choose to speak with, because, you know, there's people like, you know, oh, there's a kind of established network of people you go talk to, or or there's like, oh, this person has 50K Twitter followers, I should definitely talk to them, kind of thing. But then there's the sense of like, who is going to afford the possibility, the mutually afforded possibility, and the project of, well, let's not say project, because that's a constraining, that's a kind of thrown, you know, that's, I'm already thrown into a thing and I'm not sort of opening the space for it.
There you go, these words again. Yeah, it's like that's exactly what project also means, right? To throw forward.
To throw, you know, throwing a spear from our primal roots. It's like the depth of the quality of the possibility of space afforded by me is absolutely contiguous and concerned with everything that I do and the way that I do it and the way that I attend to the experiences that I have outside of this conversation. How closely am I attending to my environment, and how, to what extent am I sort of plumbing the depths of what's going on for me increasingly sort of, all the way up and all the way down, concurrent to that. That's sort of the okay, well, I'm going to throw a couple of things together, and keep in mind that this is done as serious.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Part of the track that I've moved on to from the Islam inquiry is an inquiry into the piece about Christianity and the Jesus inheritance. And this is what I was talking with John Badeki about yesterday. That's super present for me. And I've been a sort of student of Guy Sangstock as a kind of sage of depth of possibility of listening, relationship and in relationship with the world. So what I'm asking playfully is, what is the quality of listening that Jesus as a sage or character affords to the people that he's encountering? And so this is very much, right when you started talking about power, there was a sense of this, it was always coming from this place of separation, and the trajectory of the spiritual path is the diminishment of separation between I and concurrent diminishment, the necessary expanded notion of who am I, or Christ. I think Old Testament as well, there's this idea of like, I am, he who is called I am. And we could take it literally, or we could say, what is I am? Like, how far down does I am go? And I think the contention of the mystical and spiritual paths is it goes all the way down to I am cosmos, I am that which cannot be put into words. So that's sort of, we could even playfully say that Jesus is like game B, right? And the context and the mindset of apostles and of the lineage of the church and the entire development, and Islam as well, obviously, is a game A. And principally the rivalrous dynamic systems, and that notion of power that we're talking about has continually crept back in, and it's very much been, power is located in the institution, it's behind the curtain, it's behind the priest, and it's through somebody else, and it's not through yourself. And so the real thrust of what I really like about people like Zach Stein and Jordan and Guy and the notion of exousiance is, go down into yourself, keep going down, and then make that your orientation. And then if you continue to do that, you will continue to change. And there's this dialectic of challenge, the layers of trauma can be incredibly subtle. There's the big ones, like my father was like, didn't do this or did this, and so forth. And there's getting that out of the way, but then there's like this kind of subtleties of dualism and relationship to nature, relationship to world, relationship to cosmos, relationship to temporality.
Big one.
Which make up history, not in the sense of just history, but like the way Terence McKenna used to say it, like history, like culture is like a sort of expanded, deeply embedded inheritance, which is the ultimate constraint on our potential.
Right. Yeah. I think the Irish say the thing about the past, it's not the past, right? I heard David White say that in some podcast. I think that was And it's true. Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, so many ways to go with this one, like especially the past, you know, this intergenerational transmission, both for good and sometimes bad, you know, when you speak of the traumas. Yeah, it's like a huge one. And that is, yeah, I don't know. Where do we want to go with this?
I plant one more seed quickly.
Huh?
Um,
Oh yeah, I
so
just yeah.
one
No,
more
go
thread to
ahead.
this, which, you know, it's already pretty expanded, but it's going to be just slightly more. There's a beautiful work of art I saw on Instagram, and it's like a picture of sort of a Christ, like an exalted Christ with angels and so forth around. But then his entire gown, sort of body, like his whole thing is like this very like raw, like naked kind of like raw flesh, like eye looking out. And then the quote attached is sort of Carl Jung, like something about like enlightenment is the increasing shining of light out of darkness or something. But it's kind of tying this notion of trauma in with Christ consciousness, like
Right.
the quality in the space that's afforded by the listening is directly tied to the depth of the opening of the sort of the root structures of self, which are to varying degrees blocked by major and minor traumas. And
For sure.
so
Yeah.
each kind of, you know, I kind of conceive of the self like mycelial, like a root structure. And these root structures we carry around with us. Our bodies are visibly present, but they're actually sort of temporarily
distributed.
The past moves through us, and most people, you know, sort of Bobby and Ken, you know, they encounter one another and they get on well, and they're kind of experiencing this top band. You know, this is how the degree to which they know themselves and one another.
Right.
And that is happy and they're in love and so forth. But then there's like all of this sort of like, you know, the roots of themselves are going down and out into their parents and grandparents.
Right.
And those things are in relationship with one another as well. So that's kind of the invisible process by which amazingly, people always tend to find themselves in love with and attracted to people who have correspondent needs that were not met, traumas.
For sure. Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of other ways of sort of fleshing it out. I don't think it's kind of, this gets into kind of political correct territory, but there's, you know, I've known people who had traumas, and there's a quality where people who've experienced some sort of victimization will attract that in the world, you know, like someone who has this sense of threat from something that's happened in their past.
Right.
It's present, and then what you have in the world are, there's sort of two ways of getting in touch with the intuitive, right? There's like the very open, grounded way, and then there's like the predatory narcissist, and the predatory narcissist also is in touch with that, and he or she can detect, you know, this person is like, you know, it's not fully well articulated yet, and it's something that has to be spoken about carefully. But these are kind of hidden dynamic structures, which are probably layered in with the understanding of power that we've been talking about, and exousiance.
For sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. You know, I mean, if you just even if you just bring it down and don't even make it that abstract, like the power structures, like the in-betweenness of power, but just the the embodiment of it, right? That we have to address, and how, you know, and this is something that most people talk about ego, they also forget, like it's a body ego too. So just the mere fact of our physicality makes this so much more a prescient topic that constantly has to be negotiated, it seems, in the in-betweenness. But yeah, through this heavy layer of conditioning that we're accustomed to having to navigate it, and you know, and as we rightly do in challenge, are the power structures that we have enacted, that we call a big part of society. So, and in relationship, of course, yeah. I mean, the lens itself can be all-encompassing, and it's a difficult one because, you know, if it, as you said, points to like, oh, my dad did this and my mom did such, you know, like it's easy to shift into blame because this, yeah, this externalizing force that I described earlier in the podcast, you know, the seeking of it, the like, no one speaks about power just as one word, right? Like as an essential aspect of the nature of reality as it is. But it's always power over power to something. So it's always referential to something else, of course. Not to get into the language game too much, but that's just kind of saying how our minds, of course, are taught to handle a concept like this. But yeah, don't know where I'm going with this, but I just feel, yeah, really the need to or I feel the urgency to, yeah, I guess it's funny to come back to this again, like to transmute this whole notion. And you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone conceptually, right? You can't do it alone on the level of just bringing in something like exousiance, which is like a really good way to come at it, to forge openings. But you also simultaneously have to change the imagination around it, like our personal imagination, the understanding of power in our own souls. And then it goes even further. You know, I think Zach Stein also speaks to this, the need for this. When I just say it's an essential aspect of the true nature of reality, power, then we have to come to grips with its ontological basis and develop a relationship to that, you know, where we also can see it as just as love, as something that is completely real, you know, real in our minds, that is just as a non-material substance, even, you know, that is precious. Now it's just a scarce resource, like purely seen as a scarce resource, you know, and someone owns it. But that's what I mean. You got to simultaneously work on the owner of it, you know, and see that it's that it's the power, that you are it, that you know, embody it. But this hall of mirrors through our ego selves that we've built up, that are in communication with each other, you know, it's one ego communicating to another ego, one mental structure communicating with another mental structure, held by ideas and societal structures in which it is some sort of currency that flows, and the result is a collective trance, you know, and structures within that collective trance that we call consensus reality, and how we think we have to navigate it all. So I don't know what that was, but
we're getting very psychedelic. And it's also provoking some very interesting genesis of joining together of pieces for me.
Yeah, okay, well, yeah. We're geeking out here. I feel like we're geeking out, but it's cool, you know. I like it. So I mean, it's
I mean, I've been
we
told.
both of, yeah.
I've been told
You and
by
I
my.
are both. Go first.
Go on.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna go. Yeah. No, I was just gonna say we're both pretty good at. I think we're in some sort of feedback loop in terms of zooming out, you know, yeah, our entanglement into space. I feel it. I feel my head center kind of. It's good.
It's
It's fun.
part of it is, I think it's very good that we were able to meet in a context that wasn't about the exploration of this material. You know, it was a super embodied, like, you know, just kind of meeting as people in bodies and, like, you know, developing a relationship on that kind of basis,
Right.
which is, you know, potentially so often missing, and takes work to transmit and generate in the context of this technology, which is part of the work for me as well, is like how to, it's, you almost have to, you have to be better at it, you know, you have to be.
Oh, you should just forget about the other person. Well, better at it. No, I know what you mean. Of course, you know, we're obsessed with method, you know, as a culture, actually. But I think also in our space, the space that we hang out, you know, how to do this, how to do that. But yeah, it's I don't know. It makes a big difference, like who you speak to, right? So.
I really
But also, yeah. Wow.
I feel very afforded by you to just bring out my most edge of the frontier notions, and that's super helpful because, you know, my mother is telling me, like, you know, if you make it more than an hour long, that's going to limit, you know, a lot of people don't have the attention and stuff, and to that I say yes, but I'm not going to make that my constraint for this, you know.
No, yeah.
And I do want to throw out this piece to you because it's ripe, and quite shocking to me. But so the Genesis story of Adam and Eve, the development of consciousness in human life, separate from nature, separate and within. This is almost the starting point of the going out of man, the outgoing of man, a meta outgoing of man, which is occurring sort of, you know, at the real level of, like, we're wanderers, you know, we're pushing for the new frontier, we're going east and west and crossing the seas and conquering the forests and the natives and so forth and so forth. And there's something about the quality of the power. There's like the way in which man has become separate and within nature affords a greater complexity and a greater kind of dialectic creative polarity, and the course of history up to this point is in some ways a working out of that dynamic, and then we take the Christhood piece, and keeping in mind you can throw in Buddhahood or Socrates hood as well.
All game B.
Logos oriented sages. Effectively, what they're doing in a way is like, it's like you have the rupture, you have the going out from home, so to speak, and then there's a possibility of coming back to home in this game be transcendent way, which is like fully integrating reality in such a way where you both have agency. So that's my shutter. Not an angry god. Agency and and no agency at all, because you're just accepting things as they sort of are and as they're coming. So it really speaks to the sort of the deep meaningfulness and the radically state shifting, like modality transcending, you know, it's heart opening, it's changing the conception of time.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is being changed in this, and I think you've said it earlier, but like psychospiritual crisis is a pretty good frame for the breakdown now, I think. And you can say that Islam has been in that for like 100 years already, since the clash with modernity. And we are experiencing our own version of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bad trip. And so
Yeah.
in a bad trip, there's a kind of inflection and acceleration towards some like difficult thing, which needs to be like sort of worked with and accepted and integrated in order to afford like a transcendence, so like a sort of peace on the other side of the enormous mounting tension and energy, that's not being like rightly sort of channeled and released and related with. And so this power exousiance thing is like right on the money. So it seems like you're exactly where you need to be.
Yeah. I mean, no, this is one of these things that is just inexhaustible in some ways. Well, we'll see. You know, a lot of, I think, where I hope I can play a role is in coming up with the practices, you know, the practices of working with it and fleshing it out, because it seems to be, yeah, vital, and help other people also do that. And we're already trying to do that, of course, with Perspectiva. So that's great. But the forms, like the how, you know, that is the road before us. First, of course, these things often have to become explicit as problems or part of the problems, and conceptualizing it like as the same as other notions, like what you said about time, you know, temporics as a specific area of inquiry, working with our notion of time. Yeah, there are just many others. Power is just, of course, one of them. So I think that is important, you know, and here's, yeah, as you say, where the work needs to be done. So and I like it, you know, because it's just here is also where you can find the joy, right, in experimentation, and yeah, where it's both important, and you can have joy of discovery, you know, where you have to hold things lightly, you can't take yourself too seriously, so you have to have like this sincere irony that is often thrown around, of course, in the meta-modern scene. That term, we use it as well. So all that, I think, are just some of the ingredients that, yeah, like that lay the groundwork for it before we really can engage with the question in serious ways. All our grappling with it, you know, like in the social justice fringe, no, they're just ways of grappling with these bigger questions, because like I think power is you know, a logos, as you point out, and a Christian logos also has a power, right, to cohere and to and so we need to be very conscious of that, like first of all through the language that we use, and what are the forces of the imagination, and what are the practices that like clear out this affordance space for working with these notions, both ontologically and epistemologically, our embodiment and our aspirations. So yeah, you know, it's it's rich. It's I feel grateful, you know, to have that, and that you're also happy to hear that this is also like where you kind of are converging on. So it's important. I mean, you could do a whole series on this, right? Just on this, just on power. So, what do you think? Is this a good note to end?
Yeah.
I feels like it.
I
I
have
mean,
a
we've been
wild,
going at it for
I have a
2
wild
hours.
shutter that's going out of control now.
Yeah. So it's good.
But I think just sort of bringing recognition that it's like a very sort of personal, there's a sort of personal Evo flavor of the contribution that you're bringing to it, and the meaningful individuation and distinction of character that each person is bringing is valuable, and you've kind of brought some of that out, like in the space that is afforded, which is of course,
Thanks.
one half of the sense space, invocation and invitation, but also this like kind of lightness or like playfulness, just like you're not letting it get out of hand and like letting us sort of run off too far on
I get better.
trails without coming back to what's
It's
present.
something I got to watch out for. Yeah. I can just sometimes just run off in a direction and wonder what was I talking about, or what point was I trying to make? Yeah.
It's rabbit holes.
But thanks. Like I love these reflections back. Like it's helpful for me. This is very much an experiment. Also in being visible, I tend to kind of want to stay out of the spotlight. So, also for reasons of expression, I don't feel like I express myself very clearly often, and so this is kind of a training for me to see where it goes, where it goes. I had fun, that's definitely one important thing. So I hope the people like listening to this also think it's somewhat valuable. Apologies for my swearing. So.
I love doing that, and I wanted to have you on. You're like one of the first people I reached out to, and it took us a really long time to
get true.
Nice little sort of looping from the start of the project and before it.
Right. Yeah.
So
cool, man.
Plug it there, and
thank you.
Hit the end record. But thanks for coming on, Ivo.
Thank you, Jacob.